Okay, so this video is about to be absolutely insane, but try and prepare yourself. What's up gamers, Dreamcast Guy here, and this is Top 10 Thursday. Now normally, at the end of a year, I really like to try and count down the best of the best and the worst of the worst, to try and find the games that are the most deserving of our attention. But something very unique happened in 2019 that I've never seen before. There were a bunch of games that were released that were so bad, the developers that created them ended up quitting their jobs. There was one thing that came out that was just such a terrible dumpster fire, the publisher that put the game out ended up blocking it from being streamed, that way nobody would just see how much of a mess it was. It has been a very, very strange time, and today it's going to be really fun because we're going to dig to the very bottom of the dumpster fire to see what the hottest scum is. These are my picks of the top 10 worst games of 2019. Number 10. Crackdown 3. There's always been something so fascinating about the creation of art, the fact that people sit down with a particular vision in mind, but what we actually get is quite different. This is definitely the case when it comes to Crackdown 3, because if you remember, the original trailers years and years ago were talking about how this would actually revolutionize gaming. The main plan behind this was that it was going to be very, very cloud-based, where basically you would have an Xbox One, and by playing this game, every single brick of every single building would be perfectly destructible. You'd actually be able to knock over a skyscraper into another building and blow up a car in midair. It would be so epic, except for the fact that this is not at all what the game turned out to be. Here in 2019, we at last got Crackdown, and it turns out that pretty much all these promises completely went up in smoke. The game itself controls decent. It has this weird lock-on system that doesn't really work, and it's also very, very short, so even if you happen to pay $50 or $60 for this game, you're probably going to feel ripped off. But the worst part of all is that the cloud-based destruction environments only existed in the multiplayer, and even then, it still didn't work very well. You could basically only shoot particular spots of particular buildings in particular modes. Basically, everything they tried to sell us about Crackdown 3 turned out to just be a giant confusing mess. And even now looking at it, I'm a little bit shocked that Microsoft even decided to release it. Number 9. Terminator Resistance. I'm pretty sure that all of us can agree that perhaps one of the greatest film franchises of all time is Terminator, especially the early ones from the 80s and 90s. These movies are so freaking fun because they paint a very specifically bleak picture of the future. The idea that mankind ends up creating robots, and then the robots get so smart that they just decide to wipe us out. And something that's always existed in this universe is the idea that the Terminators are practically unstoppable. Each one of these things can kill hundreds and hundreds of humans, even with their futuristic weaponry. But unfortunately, this is one of those things that we never got to see in huge amounts. The movie's always kind of focused on our time period and just talked about the future for the most part. But Terminator Resistance, it really wanted to try and turn that around, because this takes place in the distant future and shows us the real conflict. It gives us a chance to pick up a laser rifle and rush into combat ourselves. And that actually brings me to the reason that this game just sucks so much. Terminator Resistance is stupidly easy. In fact, despite the fact that these things are supposed to be the ultimate giant tech and practically impenetrable armored robots, everything dies with pretty much one shot. Everything in this game is just so stupid. You can blast people, they're just standing next to explosive barrels, you spend a ton of time just shooting little tiny robots. Nothing in this game is actually scary, and in my opinion, it actually kind of breaks the freaking universe, because how are we supposed to expect that these completely ignorant, shambling little tin cans ever manage to hurt us at all? If one guy can destroy thousands of them by himself, how is this ever really a threat? Skynet is apparently trash. Number 8. Travis Strikes Again. Gosh, I really hate that I'm putting this on the list, but it totally earns its spot. Mostly because No More Heroes as a series is some of the best games ever made. They combine the idea of beam katana combat and really cool boss fights to make something that really kind of earns the idea of great motion control fighting. And that's part of the reason that I am just so overwhelmingly disappointed in what Travis Strikes Again turned into. This is basically just a top-down hack and slash game that is extremely repetitive. Each of the levels is the same sort of concept repeated in a slightly different way, which is that you're basically going into a video game and by beating it, you earn the next video game. But the problem is that they all very much play very much the same. You kind of just go around, you slash people a little bit, you do a couple of the same few combos, then you do a boss fight, and then you do it all again. Occasionally it tries to break up this monotony with like drag racing in cyberspace, but none of it ever really gets to that full absolute potential. You can tell that this game was definitely unfinished, because while the graphics are cool and a lot of the dialogue is silly, the game itself is just such a drag, especially when you see the cutscenes that are just green text on a black screen for such huge portions of the game. This is just one of those things that I hate to say that it's not playable. If you are a fan of No More Heroes, I bet you got some fun out of this, but you can't really sit down and say that this is at all a fantastic game. Number 7. Jump Force. An aspect of nerd culture that's really blown up over the course of the last couple of years that honestly still surprises me is anime. At this point, pretty much everybody watches anime, whether it's like catching old reruns of Naruto, or you're somebody who's trying to get the latest clips of Dragon Ball Super. Pretty much everybody watches this stuff, which is kind of why you would sort of expect that if somebody's going to be making an anime crossover game that's attempting to combine all these huge universes into one game, you'd expect it to be halfway decent, but this is a huge, colossal dumpster fire. I'm going to be honest, this is easily the funniest mess up of the entire year. I mean, there are so many times when I was trying to play this game where I just had to set down the controller because I was crying so hard with laughter. So the concept behind this project is really kind of concrete. They were trying to get a bunch of different people from the Jump Force universe that we all know and love and put them into one huge battlefield. The thing is that they clearly just didn't know how to balance it. Basically, everybody in this game, despite how strong they are or what kind of powers they have, everybody plays the exact same. You have a fast attack, you have a slow attack that's a little bit stronger, you have an energy strike, and you have a special ability. And pretty much everyone fights the exact same. They obviously just threw this together to try and justify having a halfway decent plot, but they didn't even do that. The writing in this game is super terrible, but even that, the acting is terrible. Characters practically slide in like puppets, bored say things like, oh no, the universe is being destroyed, and then slide off before you do another very badly done battle. Number 6. Modern Combat. You know what? Right here and now, I want to try and invent a job, like a special position that one gamer will have every single year. Let's call this position the President of Gaming, a person who can come out and try and pass special laws to make the entire industry a lot better. Okay, well let's pretend that right now I am the gaming president. I think that we need to pass a law that you can't just put terrible cell phone games directly onto consoles, because that's what this is. Modern Combat originally existed to just try and be a point-and-click shooter, something where you would tap the ground to move around and then tap enemies to fire a bullet. Converting this really very limited idea onto a console game just does not work. The big issue is that since you have to play games in such a slow fashion on cell phones, when you convert it over to having real buttons, the AI is trash. Basically, every enemy is so dumb they walk in straight lines. You just literally pew 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 them down and they fall over dead. You can't really get thrilled about the plots and twists and turns when every single moment of real gameplay is so stilted. This is one of those games that as soon as I started playing it, I immediately regretted buying it, because yes, I was stupid enough to actually purchase Modern Combat. When I went to this, I kind of predicted that it might be like a ripoff of Call of Duty and at least have some decent mechanics, but no, this is a terrible cash grab that doesn't even give the slightest bit of a care about quality. Number 5. Contra Rogue Core. Have you ever had two things that you really love get combined and somehow become something you hate? Because that is genuinely how I feel about Contra Rogue Core. I'm a pretty big fan of Contra, but more than that, I am a ginormous lover of everything that is twin-stick shooters. There's something so fun about the idea of just having very straightforward ideas behind the controls, but then giving us really cool firefights and surrounding us with enemies and kind of just making layers and layers of upgrades and mechanics. But here, we have a game that is trying to do the bare freaking minimum. Contra Rogue Core has you playing as like a panda or this lady with a demon stomach, and then you play through some incredibly parsed levels. You walk around, you blast a couple of very slow walking enemies, and then move on. At no point does this game even try and make the slightest bit of effort to really be giant or explosive, other than when there's these weird, heavily scripted boss fights where it becomes an over-the-shoulder shooter. You know, this is one of those games where I wish I could almost rewind time and go and help with the development, because I do feel like the people who created this, they thought that they were doing something unique. It's totally apparent that they had the passion for this brand, it's just that they didn't really know how to do the follow-through, especially when you see the hilariously bad graphics. I mean, if we're just being totally fair, this stuff looks like a Nintendo 64 game, except definitely downscaled. I really wish this game could have been good, or at least halfway decent, to breathe new life into the Contra series, and instead, it's probably going to be back and dead and dormant, all because of really crappy Rogue Core. Number 4. SolSeraph. Let me begin this entry by attempting to explain what the project actually is, because this title, while relatively unknown, is certainly definitely the weirdest game I played by far in all of 2019. So this is two separate games in one. Half of it is a side-scrolling hack and slash, where you're going along as an angel and trying to chop up the forces of evil, and the other half is actually a top-down, real-time strategy game where you're attempting to defend villagers who are worshipping you from the onslaughts of the undead and different terrible monsters that are coming out of the wild. Now, both of these gameplay concepts are not bad on their own, but when you put them together, it just doesn't work. Now, I did fully beat this game, and a lot of times while I was playing it, I found myself just completely lost, trying to figure out what the idea behind certain design choices were. Like, one of the things that I definitely despise the most is that when you're playing these side-scrolling levels, they give you practically no health. So basically, you get your initial health bars, and as it drains, you just get completely screwed over, which means that when you're playing this, every single time you make a mistake, you're probably going to have to replay the entire stage again because you managed to miss one freaking jump. But at no point does this game ever really seem like a totally realized experience. This is really one of those titles that tries to do a lot of things with a lot of ambition and doesn't fully complete a single one of them ever. Number 3. Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Loot crates, microtransactions, and pay-to-win mechanics is easily the very worst part of modern gaming. It is a plague upon this industry that so many times studios try and find new ways to try and trick the audience into paying more for less product. I mean, it is just such a terrible issue that seems to grow faster than it's shrinking. And Ghost Recon Breakpoint was easily the worst game this year that managed to really emphasize this. Basically, as soon as the game came out, people were logging in and playing and saying, hey, this has some pretty decent controls. When you're out there on a mission trying to blast the bad guys and flying around in a helicopter, the moment-to-moment action is very polished. But the moment you take a second to even glance at the menus, you notice that there is a huge, scummy portion of this game that they definitely didn't advertise, which is that you can purchase every single item in the game day one. Did you want a super jeep? Well, swipe your credit card. Oh, did you want that super awesome scoped sniper rifle that can pierce directly through the armor of a super tank? Well, you can buy that for just $9.99. This game was built from the ground up to be a money-making machine, and I don't mean that just by trying to sell you a good product. All they cared about was trying to make the game be a treadmill for microtransactions. And this ended up costing Ubisoft a ton of profit in the process. This game completely bombed. Then they tried to do an official apology. Then they removed removed a bunch of the microtransactions, but not after the huge fanbase had already quit. At this point, I'll be really shocked if we even see Ghost Recon for years after this, because this was such a colossal failure. They screwed it up for all the wrong reasons, and they definitely paid the price. Number 2. Anthem. So this game right here is by far the most disappointing project in all of 2019. While there is technically a game that's a little bit worse, I think we just have to talk about the fact that Anthem was such a huge letdown. This was developed by BioWare, people who previously were considered to be some of the kings of game development. I mean, after all, they created the Mass Effect trilogy, one of the best stories that's ever been written in sci-fi history, and now they've just done this. There have been tons of leaks and secret interviews kind of detailing what went wrong, and it sounds like Anthem was extremely rushed. Electronic Arts basically just told them, you need to have your game done early 2019, and I don't care what state it's in. And what we got was a complete shell of a shooter. This basically has very, very few mechanics. We're flying around in mech suits and battling weird, mysterious aliens, but there's not really a backstory, there's not really a lot of lore. It's just one of those games that's like 10 hours of rinse and repeat. You land, you blast a couple units, and you fly off. It never takes the time to properly establish why we're shooting stuff, it just gives you more stuff to shoot. And what's weird is that while I did play the entire main story, people decided to stick with this and play hundreds and hundreds of hours. And something I heard a lot from the most diehard fans of Anthem is apparently the longer you play it, the more you despise it. Apparently there were all these big secrets and reveals that they were trying to do later on that completely fell flat. And what's really sad about this is that even the developers agree with them. The people who made this game all basically quit. Everybody who's involved with this project has permanently left BioWare rather than continuing to work on it, which means that not only is this a sad game that's completely a freaking flop, but more than that, it's basically killed BioWare. Number 1. Left Alive. Whenever I do these top 10 videos, typically on the screen in front of me, I like to put some detailed notes about each of the games, the way I can just kind of riff off that and talk very naturally and talk about each of them and the goods and the bads. And what's funny is that Left Alive, this is easily the very biggest freaking catastrophe I've seen of any game this year. It is an unplayable mess. And in fact, on my screen, I didn't even make notes because I just can't think of anything good to say. It is terrible. This is basically a glitchy ripoff of Metal Gear Solid. Think of it as like Metal Glitch Poopy. Okay, so basically the idea is that you're stuck in like a futuristic city with giant mecha cops that are trying to go around, and you're trying to sneak in and try and do a bunch of like stealth missions. In a lot of ways, this looks and plays very similar to an adventure you'd go on with Snake, except for the fact that the controls are dog crap. Basically, whenever you're trying to do stuff, you need to try and stealthily get past every single unit, or they will instant kill you. By using distraction, stealth, and a little bit of your own crappy weaponry, you need to try and find a way to get past every single unit in the game, or else you will very likely die before you even realize you made a mistake. Now, the reason this is frustrating is because the maps and the missions can be very, very long. Imagine if you were trying to do a mission that's like 1 hour in length, you know, a good nice chunk of combat, except you happen to step across one invisible yellow line 45 minutes into this task, and you instantly die and instantly go back to the start. This game sucks down to its very core, and what's funny is that even Square Enix, the people who published this, realized that was the case. For the first couple days that this was initially released, as soon as you put this disc inside your PlayStation 4, it would actually turn off streaming capabilities. You could not stream any part of this game. It wasn't like it had blocked cutscenes, or some games will do that thing where it automatically blocks streaming while you're doing like a save file or something. No, for this game, every single part of it was unstreamable, and that to me is hilarious. It's pretty obvious that even they realized that the more people saw this, the less they're gonna buy it, and it still didn't manage to save them from this being such a huge money waster. Even now, a full 11 months after I played it, I have to just chuckle about how much of an obvious freaking stupid idea this was, and yet here it is. I'm giving this completely glitchy, sloppy piece of junk my pick as the #1 worst game in all of 2019. Well, that just about wraps up this week's Top 10 Thursday. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you have an idea for a future Top 10 you'd like to see, please leave it in the comments. And if you want, be sure to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell and all that nonsense. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting such a hectic and crazy year in gaming. You guys absolutely rock. So please do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. I had to play so many garbage games this year. I'm not complaining, I'm just saying that some of these were very sucky. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.